sweat dripped onto the greasy concrete as roaring V-twins shattered the midnight silence. A patched Hell's Angel blocked the garage exit, his custom chopper dead. Fixing it meant survival, but doing it for free? That was a death wish. What happened at sunrise changed one desperate mechanic's life forever. Dust storms in the Mojave Desert don't just carry sand, they carry a profound, suffocating isolation. For Arthur Bennett, a 52-year-old mechanic operating a failing shop on the desolate outskirts of Needles, California, that isolation had become a prison. Bennett's automotive and cycle was a graveyard of rusted chassis and broken dreams, a business mere days away from the auction block. Arthur sat at his cluttered metal desk, the flickering neon sign outside casting a sickly red glow over the foreclosure notice in his oil-stained hands. He owed the bank $43,000. He had $82 in his checking account. Since his wife passed away 3 years prior, the medical bills had devoured everything. His shop, his home, his life's work, it was all evaporating into the unforgiving California heat. It was 2:15 a.m. on a Tuesday. The wind howled, rattling the corrugated tin roof of the garage. Then, cutting through the gale, came a sound that made Arthur's blood run cold. It wasn't the smooth, steady purr of a late-model sedan. It was the violent, irregular, and agonizing mechanical death rattle of a heavy V-twin engine tearing itself apart. Arthur stood up, his joints popping, and walked toward the open bay doors. Out of the swirling dust emerged a massive, imposing silhouette. The motorcycle limped into the pool of light cast by the overhead halogens, coughing out a thick cloud of acrid black smoke before violently shuddering and dying right in the center of Arthur's bay. The rider swung a heavy steel-toed boot over the saddle. He was a mountain of a man, standing at least 6'4", heavily bearded and covered in road grime. But it wasn't his size that made Arthur's stomach drop. It was the leather cut he wore over his denim jacket. Right there, stitched into the back of the leather, was the winged death's head, the unmistakable insignia of the Hell's Angels Motorcycle Club. Above the skull was the top rocker, bold and blood red. Below it, the bottom rocker proudly proclaimed California. On his chest, a smaller patch read President. Arthur swallowed hard, his throat dry as bone. You didn't just casually interact with a chapter president of the most notorious motorcycle club in the world, especially not in the dead of night with no witnesses around for miles? Shops closed, Arthur managed to say, his voice lacking the authority he desperately wanted to project. The giant of a man took off his riding glasses, revealing cold, piercing blue eyes that scanned the dilapidated garage. Shops open, he replied, his voice a deep, gravelly baritone that brokered no argument. Name's Donnie. My primary drive just snapped, and my clutch feels like it swallowed a handful of gravel. I need to be in Bakersfield by dawn. Donnie Iron Brooks wasn't asking for a favor. It was a command. Bakersfield was over 200 miles away, and Donnie's bike, a highly customized, immaculate Harley-Davidson Road King, was completely immobilized. Look, Donnie, Arthur said, taking a cautious step forward, wiping his hands on a rag. I respect the patch, I do, but I don't have the parts for a custom Road King primary. My supplier in Barstow won't open for another 6 hours, and even then, I couldn't afford to buy the parts if I wanted to. Donnie closed the distance between them in 2 massive strides. He loomed over Arthur, the scent of leather, gasoline, and stale cigarette smoke washing over the mechanic. I don't care about your supplier, old man, and I don't care about your cash flow. I have club business at sunrise. Business that, if I miss, means people get hurt. You are going to fix my bike. Arthur looked past Donnie to the gleaming, though currently crippled, machine. He walked over, kneeling beside the primary cover. The heat radiating off the engine block was intense. Arthur grabbed his socket wrench and quickly removed the cover. The smell of burnt transmission fluid hit him instantly. Your primary chain is in 3 pieces, Arthur muttered, shining a penlight into the casing. It chewed up the clutch basket. It's a complete teardown. Even if I had the parts, it's a 4-hour job in the dark. Donnie crossed his massive arms. Then you better get started. Arthur felt a surge of panic mixed with a strange, deep-seated resignation. He looked back at his desk at the foreclosure notice. What did he have left to lose? If he refused, Donnie could burn the place to the ground tonight, saving the bank the trouble. If he tried to fix it and failed, the outcome wouldn't be much better. I don't have the parts, Donnie, Arthur repeated, his voice remarkably steady this time. I can't invent steel out of thin air. Donning's eyes narrowed. He unzipped his jacket, subtly revealing the heavy black grip of a .45 caliber pistol tucked into his waistband. It wasn't a direct threat, but a deliberate display of consequence. Find a way, mechanic. Arthur stared at the gun, then back at Donnie. His mind raced. There was only one option, and it was a choice that twisted a knife in his own heart. Hidden in the back corner of the shop, under a heavy canvas tarp, sat Arthur's own pride and joy. A 1998 Harley-Davidson Fat Boy. It was the bike he and his late wife used to ride up the coast before she got sick. It was immaculate, perfectly tuned, and contained the exact same primary drive and clutch assembly that Donnie's Road King needed. Arthur had sworn he would never part with it, that he would sell the shop before he sold the bike. But tonight the shop was already dead, and the man standing in front of him was very much alive and very dangerous. Arthur took a deep breath. Pull it to the center lift, he told the Hell's Angel. I'll be right back. The sound of clinking metal and the heavy thud of dropping parts echoed through the empty desert night. Arthur worked with a frantic, desperate precision. First, he went to the back corner of the garage and pulled the top off his '98 Fat Boy. The chrome gleamed in the dim light, a ghost of better days. Arthur felt a lump form in his throat as he put a wrench to his own machine. He was essentially performing open-heart surgery, removing a perfectly healthy organ from his prized possession to save the life of a gangster's motorcycle. He stripped the primary cover, carefully extracting the chain, the sprockets, and the heavy clutch basket. Every bolt he removed felt like letting go of another memory of his wife. He carried the heavy, oil-slicked parts over to Donnie's lift. Donnie sat on an overturned milk crate a few feet away, smoking a cigarette, watching Arthur's every move with an unblinking, predatory gaze. "Where'd you get the parts?" Donnie asked, his voice cutting through the silence. "Don't worry about it," Arthur grunted, sliding the new clutch basket onto the main shaft. "I don't like mysteries," Donnie replied, standing up and walking over to the back of the shop. He saw the uncovered Fat Boy, its side exposed, bleeding transmission fluid onto a piece of cardboard. Donnie stopped. He looked at the stripped bike, then back to Arthur, who was up to his elbows in grease, talking down the compensator sprocket. Donnie didn't say a word, but the atmosphere in the garage shifted. The palpable threat of violence slowly dissolved into something else, a heavy, silent understanding of the sacrifice playing out in front of him. For the next 3 hours, neither man spoke. The only sounds were the desert wind, the rhythmic clicking of Arthur's ratchet, and the occasional scratch of Donnie's lighter. Arthur's hands ached, his back screamed in protest, and his eyes burned from exhaustion and the fumes of brake cleaner. But he didn't stop. He couldn't. As he was adjusting the tension on the newly installed primary chain, a worn leather wallet slipped from Donnie's cut and fell onto the concrete floor. It landed open. Arthur glanced down. Inside the wallet wasn't a wad of $100 bills or twab contraband. It was a faded, crinkled photograph of a young girl, maybe 7 years old, wearing a hospital gown hooked up to a tangle of tubes. She looked terrifyingly fragile, but she was smiling. Donnie quickly snatched the wallet off the floor, his massive hand covering the photo. For a fraction of a second, the hardened Hell's Angel looked vulnerable. He looked away, stuffing the wallet back into his vest. "She okay?" Arthur asked quietly, not looking up from his wrench. Donnie hesitated. "Leukemia. She's at Bakersfield Memorial. Taking a bad turn tonight. That's why I need to be there." The club business I mentioned, that's just what I tell my guys so they don't see me sweat. A president isn't supposed to panic. Arthur stopped turning the wrench. He looked at Donnie, really looked at him. Beneath the terrifying patches, the sheer size, and the gun in his waistband, Arthur saw something intimately familiar, a man drowning in the terrifying helplessness of watching a loved one slip away. Arthur swallowed hard, remembering the sterile smell of the oncology ward, the beeping monitors, and the day he lost his own wife. My wife, Sarah, fought breast cancer for 4 years, Arthur said softly, his voice trembling slightly. We spent everything we had, sold the house, maxed the cards. It didn't matter in the end. But those last few hours, being there with her, it was everything. Donnie looked at Arthur, the harsh lines of his face softening just a fraction. He nodded once, a silent acknowledgement of a shared, terrible brotherhood that had nothing to do with motorcycles. I'll have you on the road in 20 minutes, Arthur said, turning back to the bike with a renewed ferocity. By 5:30 a.m., the first hints of purple and orange began to bleed into the dark desert sky. Arthur tightened the last bolt on the primary cover, wiped the chrome clean with a rag, and stepped back. Fire it up, Arthur said, wiping the sweat from his forehead with the back of a greasy forearm. Donnie swung his leg over the Road King. He turned the ignition and hit the starter. The massive engine roared to life instantly, a beautiful, deafening thunder that shook the dust off the garage rafters. It idled perfectly, smooth and powerful. Donnie pulled the clutch in and shifted into first gear. The heavy clunk was solid and tight. The bike was perfect. Donnie killed the engine. The sudden silence was ringing. He reached into his jacket pocket. I don't carry much cash on the night ride, but I have a couple of $100. What's the damage, Arthur? Arthur looked at the man, then out at the rising sun. Tomorrow the bank would lock the doors to his shop forever. A couple of $100 wouldn't even cover the interest on his debt. It wouldn't save him, but he knew what it meant to race against the clock to a hospital bed. Arthur shook his head. Put your money away, Donnie. Donnie frowned, his brow furrowing. I don't take charity, and a Hell's Angel pays his debts. You gutted your own ride for me. It's not charity, Arthur said, stepping forward and looking the giant biker dead in the eye. It's a toll for the road. You ride hard, and you get to that hospital. You hold her hand, and you don't let go until you have to. That's the price. Donnie stared at Arthur for a long, heavy moment. The imposing biker looked at the stripped fat boy in the corner, then back at the exhausted, bankrupt mechanic who had just given away his last valuable possession. Without a word, Donnie fired the engine back up. He pulled out of the bay doors, the headlight cutting through the dawn mist. He paused at the edge of the property, looked back over his shoulder, gave Arthur a single sharp nod, and tore off down the highway toward Bakersfield, leaving nothing but a cloud of dust and the fading echo of exhaust. Arthur stood alone in his quiet garage. He looked at his ruined fat boy, then at the foreclosure notice on his desk. He had lost his shop, he had ruined his bike, and he hadn't made a dime. He slumped into his desk chair, buried his face in his greasy hands, and wept. He was completely, utterly ruined. He didn't know it yet, but he had just made the most lucrative investment of his entire life. The unforgiving Mojave sun crested the horizon, baking the corrugated tin roof of Dennett's automotive and cycle. Inside, Arthur awoke with a start, his cheek pressed against the cold, greasy metal of his desk. His spine screamed in agony from a night spent contorted over a motorcycle engine, and his head throbbed with a dull ache of profound exhaustion. He blinked away the grit in his eyes, the events of the previous night rushing back to him in a flood of panic. Donnie, the Hell's Angel, the stripped fat boy, the foreclosure. Arthur stood up, his knees popping, and walked out into the blinding morning light. The desert was dead quiet, save for the dry rustle of sagebrush. He looked down at the gravel driveway. The heavy tire tracks from Donnie's Road King were still etched into the dust, pointing west toward Bakersfield. Arthur prayed the giant man had made it to his daughter in time. He glanced at his cheap wristwatch. It was 8:45 a.m. The bank would be here at 9. Arthur walked back inside, grabbed a rag, and slowly began wiping down his tools. It was a pointless gesture, organizing a shop he no longer owned, but it was the only thing keeping him from completely breaking down. He heard the crunch of tires on gravel, and his heart sank. It was time. He walked out of the bay to see a silver luxury sedan pulling into his lot, kicking up a plume of white dust. Out stepped Richard Lawson, the regional manager for Pacific Southwest Bank. Lawson was a man who wore too much cologne and a suit that cost more than Arthur's entire tool collection. He had a smug, predatory smile that he wore like a badge of honor. Trailing behind Lawson was a bored-looking San Bernardino County Sheriff's deputy, holding a thick manila folder. "Morning, Arthur," Lawson said, stepping carefully around a puddle of dried oil. He didn't look Arthur in the eye. He was already surveying the property, mentally calculating its liquidation value. "I see you haven't packed. We talked about this last week. The grace period is over." Arthur wiped his hands on his dirty jeans, his chest tightening. "I know, Richard. I needed one more night. I've been here 20 years. You can't give me 30 more days." Lawson chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. 30 days? Arthur, you're $43,000 in arrears. The bank is not a charity. The property goes to auction on Friday. I need the keys, and I need you off the premises by noon. The deputy stepped forward, looking sympathetic but resolute. "Sorry, Mr. Bennett. Court order. If you need help gathering your personal items, I can wait, but the building's officially property of the bank now." Arthur felt the last remaining fight drain out of his body. He nodded slowly, reaching into his pocket for the heavy brass keyring. He had lost. Sarah was gone, his savings were gone, his shop was gone, and his beloved fat boy sat crippled in the corner. Just as Arthur's fingers brushed the keys, a low, rhythmic vibration began to pulse through the soles of his work boots. It started as a deep hum, a tremor in the earth that made the loose tin on the garage roof rattle. Lawson stopped mid-sentence, looking up at the sky. The deputy placed a hand on his duty belt, turning toward the long, straight stretch of Highway 66. The hum grew into a roar. Then it became a deafening, chest-rattling thunder. Over the slight rise in the highway, a single headlight appeared. Then 2, then 10, then 50. A massive, tightly packed formation of heavy cruiser motorcycles was barreling down the 2-lane desert road, riding 2 abreast in perfect, terrifying synchronization. The desert air filled with the deafening roar of straight pipehead V-twins and the distinct, intimidating gleam of polished chrome and black leather. Lawson took a step back, his face turning the color of old parchment. "What is that?" he stammered over the noise. The convoy didn't pass by. At the edge of Arthur's property, the lead rider raised a single, leather-clad fist. In brutal, beautiful unison, 50 motorcycles geared down, the collective roar of their engines echoing off the distant mountains. They turned into Bennett's Automotive and Cycle, flooding the dirt lot, circling the silver luxury sedan, and blocking the highway exit completely. The dust plumed into the air, choking the morning light. As the riders cut their engines one by one, the silence that followed was heavier and more intimidating than the noise had been. Every single rider wore the winged death's head on their back. The Hell's Angels had arrived. Arthur stood frozen. 50 sets of hard, uncompromising eyes stared at the 3 men by the garage doors. The lead rider kicked his kickstand down and dismounted. He wasn't Donnie. He was shorter, wider, built like a fire hydrant, with a thick gray beard and a jagged scar running down his left cheek. His bottom rocker read, "California." His front patch read, "Vice President." The man walked toward them, his heavy boots crunching loudly on the gravel. He ignored Lawson entirely and walked straight up to Arthur. "You Arthur Bennett?" the man asked. His voice was like a chainsaw cutting through wet timber. Arthur nodded, his mouth bone dry. "Yes, sir." The vice president extended a massive calloused hand. "Name's Clayton. They call me Brick." Donnie sent us." Before Arthur could process this, Lawson stepped forward, his arrogance briefly overriding his obvious terror. "Excuse me," Lawson squeaked, adjusting his expensive tie. "This is private property. Pacific Southwest Bank has just taken possession of this parcel. I'm going to have to ask you and your motorcycle enthusiasts to vacate immediately." Brick slowly turned his head, looking down at Lawson as if he had just stepped in something unpleasant. The 50 bikers behind him shifted on their feet. The sound of heavy leather creaking and boot heels scraping was enough to make the deputy instinctively take 2 steps back toward his cruiser. "Private property, huh?" Brick rumbled, taking a step toward the banker. He invaded Lawson's personal space, towering over the suited man. "Funny you should say that, suit. Because my brothers and we just took a little ride down from the clubhouse, and we brought some paperwork of our own." Brick reached inside his leather cut. Lawson flinched, but the biker didn't pull a weapon. Instead, he pulled out a thick, legal-sized envelope and slammed it flat onto Arthur's chest. Arthur reflexively grabbed it. "Open it, mechanic," Brick ordered. Arthur, his hands shaking slightly, tore the top off the envelope. Inside was a stack of official bank documents. On top was a cashier's check, drawn from a massive corporate holding company out of Los Angeles. The check was made out to Pacific Southwest Bank. The amount was $50,000. Behind the check was the original deed to the property of Bennett's Automotive and Cycle. Attached to the deed was a stamped, notarized letter of satisfaction, explicitly stating that all liens and debts on the property had been cleared in full. Arthur stared at the numbers. He read the deed 3 times. His brain simply refused to process the information. "I don't understand," Arthur whispered, looking up at the scarred vice president. Rick turned to Lawson, who was trying to peek over Arthur's shoulder. "That check clears his debt," Brick sneered at the banker. "The extra $7,000 is for the inconvenience fees you bloodsuckers love to tack on. The wire transfer was executed at 8 a.m. this morning by our corporate attorneys in San Francisco. This land is completely paid off. It belongs to Arthur Bennett. Now, get your shiny little car off our friend's dirt." Lawson's jaw dropped. He looked from the cashier's check to the 50 heavily armed bikers, then to the deputy, who was furiously pretending to write something in a small notebook, clearly having no intention of intervening. Lawson snatched his briefcase, practically ran to his sedan, and peeled out of the lot, spraying gravel into the ditch. The deputy offered Arthur a quick, polite nod and quietly drove away. Arthur stood clutching the papers to his chest, his eyes burning with unshed tears. "Why?" he choked out, looking at Brick. "Donnie, he didn't have to do this. I told him he didn't owe me." Brick's harsh expression softened, just for a moment. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a cell phone, holding it up for Arthur to see. On the screen was a photo taken just a few hours ago. It showed Donnie, the massive club president, sitting in a hospital chair, fast asleep. Curled up on his massive chest was a little girl in a hospital gown. She was pale, but she was breathing on her own. Her heart stopped at 5:45 a.m., Brick said quietly, so only Arthur could hear. The doctors were about to call it. Donnie burst through the ICU doors at 5:48 a.m. The moment she heard his voice, she fought back. She stabilized. "The docs say the crisis is over. She's going to make it." Arthur covered his mouth with his hand, a heavy sob tearing from his throat. The memory of his own wife, the desperate ticking clock of a hospital room, it all crashed down on him. He had saved that little girl. His broken fat boy had bought a father the most valuable thing in the universe. "Time. Donnie told us what you did," Brick continued, his voice returning to its normal gravelly rumble. "He told us you gutted your own ride, your personal iron, for a complete stranger wearing a patch. He told us about the bank. You sacrificed your livelihood to give a father a chance to say goodbye to his kid." Brick stepped back and gestured to the highway. A heavy, flatbed tow truck was slowly backing into the lot, honking its horn. Secured to the bed wasn't just a motorcycle. It was a massive wooden shipping crate bearing the logo of a high-end custom motorcycle parts manufacturer from Milwaukee. "The tub respects loyalty, Arthur," Brick announced, his voice carrying across the silent lot so every biker could hear. "And we protect those who protect our own. The deed is yours. The land is yours. In that crate on the truck is a brand new, high-performance primary drive, an upgraded clutch, and a complete engine rebuild kit for your '98 Fat Boy. Top of the line, paid for." Arthur was weeping now, openly, the tears cutting tracks through the grease and dirt on his face. "I don't know what to say. This is too much. I can't accept all this." Brick stepped forward and gripped Arthur's shoulder with a hand like a vise. It was a gesture of profound, undeniable respect. "You don't have a choice, mechanic," Brick smiled, a terrifying but genuine expression. "Because we're also putting you on retainer. The California chapter of the Hells Angels just found its new official mechanic. We have over 100 bikes in the state, and they all need turning. You're going to be very, very busy." The 50 bikers behind Brick erupted into a massive, deafening cheer. They revved their engines, honked their horns, and stomped their boots, the sound washing over Arthur in a wave of raw, untamed brotherhood. Later that afternoon, after the convoy had rolled back onto the highway, leaving behind the crate of parts and a future Arthur had thought was dead, he walked back into his garage. The silence had returned, but it wasn't the suffocating, isolating silence of the night before. It was a peaceful, hopeful quiet. He walked over to his desk, took the bank's foreclosure notice, and tore it neatly down the middle. He dropped it into the trash can. Then Arthur walked over to his stripped, bleeding Fat Boy. He laid a hand on the cold chrome of the gas tank. He had lost everything to the desert, to illness, to the cruel grind of life. But in his darkest hour, by choosing compassion over survival, he hadn't just saved a little girl's life. He had resurrected his own. Arthur grabbed a fresh rag, picked up his wrench, and got to work. When you risk everything to help a stranger, the universe has a mysterious way of paying you back. Arthur Bennett lost his business to save a little girl's life, and in return gained a brotherhood that rebuilt his entire world. If this incredible true story of sacrifice and redemption moved you, smash that like button, share this video, and subscribe for more unbelievable real-life drama.